My father always longed for a son. Instead, he was blessed with 3 daughters. He despised us all, hated my twin sisters, despised my mother, but he hated me the most because I was the youngest child before she passed away. Yet, he still treated me like his little boy, trying to instill his disdain for my own gender. "Stop crying," he'd roar, "or you'll end up like your whiny, pathetic mother." After years of this abuse, he was shocked when I grew up to be a tomboy. I believe he hated it even more because I constantly reminded him of what he could never have. My mother died when she was just 27, and I was only 4. The coroner ruled it a natural death, a strange heart complication that claimed her in her sleep. My father, however, insisted it was due to a family curse. Every time I sought him out, desperate for more information about a mother I never really knew, he had little to say. I'm convinced he had been drunk since the day she died. Every woman in her damn family dies at 27. He'd slur between belches, his breath reeking of stale beer. I think the real curse was that my mother was the one who died, not him. I wasn't entirely convinced by the erratic thoughts of a perpetually drunk man, but when I lost both of my sisters just months before their 28th birthdays, I knew it couldn't be a coincidence. Miriam was found murdered, her face gruesomely mutilated while she was out jogging. Johanna took her own life just days later. I was the one who found her, hanging in her apartment bedroom when I went to pick her up for Miriam's funeral. She had been swinging from the beams all night. It's hard to live a normal life knowing you have an expiration date, especially when it spans an entire year. I always dreaded my birthday, which from a young age was less about fun and birthday cake and more about worry and coffins. But after Miriam and Johanna died, my next birthday, 25, was the most terrifying day of my life. 26 was worse, and 27 was unimaginable. This is it, I thought, as I closed all the blinds in my apartment and drank the last drop of vodka from the bottle. This is the last year of my life. 27 was uneventful, to say the least. Why make long-term plans or form meaningful relationships when I knew they simply couldn't last? The worst part of this final year was not knowing when my impending death would come. It could be any day within the last 364 days. It could happen in the next minute. I have to admit, I became something of a recluse, always locking my windows, adding extra locks to my door, the phone only ringing to voicemail. I hid under my blankets with the lights off whenever someone knocked on my door. I stockpiled non-perishable food and various supplies I would need for the year. I was so paranoid that I even covered my mailbox, stuffing a towel in the area beneath my front door. I wanted nothing from the outside world, God forbid an anthrax letter. Going underground didn't really matter anyway. I had no friends or family left. My mother and both of my sisters were dead, and my father disowned me when I came out as a lesbian after my sisters' deaths. I moved out and cut off contact shortly after. The night before my 27th birthday, I started receiving strange calls from a blocked number. I was always afraid of phone calls, so I just let them ring. The number kept calling, at least once a day throughout the last year. Then the knocking began, first once a week, but it only got worse, more frequent, and the pounding on my door became increasingly desperate each time. Convinced it had something to do with my inevitable death, I was driven insane by the unknown visitor, especially in the last week. Last night, I got ready for bed, knowing that tomorrow, today now, was the day I would turn 28. My time was up, and I sought comfort in a bottle of alcohol. I found none. I drunkenly and deliriously fell into bed, praying the morning wouldn't come, even though I knew it would. Eventually, I fell asleep, but it was restless and unsatisfying sleep. the kind where you feel like you have one eye open, always vigilant. That's why I woke up abruptly when the door to my bedroom squeaked open early in the morning, before the first light. I shot out of bed, looking around in panic, first seeing nothing out of the ordinary except the door slightly ajar. A closer look revealed something I had missed, something that made my heart race and shook me to my core. Two dark figures stood in the empty space behind the half-open door, motionless, almost like a pair of statues, waiting, watching, silent. Leave me alone," I squeaked, unable to move, paralyzed by their presence. Instead, the shadowy figures crept out of the door, slowly crawling toward me in the darkness. I knew this would surely be the end of my life, the fulfillment of my curse, if I didn't act. Suddenly, I remembered the self-defense techniques I had memorized, turned on the bedside lamp to blind the intruders, and reached under the table to pull out the knife I had taped there a year ago, a birthday gift to myself. But as soon as the light flooded the room, I knew the blade would be useless. My intruders were not a pair of assailants, at least not human. In the yellow light of the lamp, I recognized the identities of the dark figures. They were my sisters. Miriam stood at the foot of my bed, pale, wearing the same conservative black dress in which I had found her dead years ago, the one she had chosen for Johanna's funeral. Her head dangled parallel to her shoulders, her neck grotesquely twisted from hanging. Johanna was a few steps behind her. I could only assume it was her, given the severity of her injuries. She had a gunshot wound to her head, so brutal that we weren't allowed to see her after her death. So intense that it had completely disfigured her face. The lower half of her face had been reduced to a pool of blood, her jawbone barely attached on one side, her mouth mutilated, with only a few teeth randomly anchored in the chaos. "Why are you here?" I screamed, pulling my knees to my chest and holding them tight. Are you here to take me away?" Miriam tried weakly to shake her head, the side of her face barely brushing her shoulder. She waited a few moments before putting one foot in front of the other and moving to the side of my bed. As I instinctively recoiled, she slowed her pace. Johanna followed her until they both stood beside me. I whimpered as Miriam leaned over me, her head suddenly falling forward with the movement, her neck snapping repulsively. With her lips brushing my ear, she whispered, She tried." Her speech was labored and hoarse, as if her vocal cords were nearly torn. "What do you mean, Miriam?" I pleaded. Her lips moved once more at my ear, but no sound came, despite the obvious effort. Johanna tried to answer my question but could only spit blood from the gaping wound in her face, throwing one of her remaining teeth to the floor as her jawbone dangerously swung, barely holding. She lifted a hand, slowly forming it into a fist before slamming her knuckles fiercely against my pleading. The incessant noises frightened me, forcing my eyes tightly shut and pulling my knees even closer to my chest. Johanna's pounding seemed to only increase in volume, seemed to last forever until, finally, it stopped. I tore my eyes open and found that both of my sisters were gone, that the early morning light was starting to seep through the slats of my blinds. It was just after 6 o'clock, June 7th, the day of my 28th birthday. I was born at 9:26 a.m. After learning about the curse, I had memorized the exact time of my final expiration. I had only 3 hours and 16 minutes to live, if I even had that long. I pulled my blankets over my head and decided to spend the rest of my life sleeping. I thought I'd rather die peacefully in my sleep like my mother than suffer a similar fate as my sisters. However, my plans were interrupted by the damn knocking at the door. The interruption usually didn't come so early in the morning. Initially, I decided to ignore the strange visitor, but soon pulled the blankets back down as a certain sense of familiarity washed over me. The pounding on the door reminded me all too much of Johanna's pounding just moments before. It could easily have been a trick of the curse, but something compelled me to open the door. "What do you want?" I shouted from behind the barrier, clinging to the relative safety it provided. The response came in the voice of an unknown man. "I just have a letter for you, miss." "Just slide it under the door and go, please," I replied, using my bare foot to remove the towel I was using to block the small gap underneath. He placed a light yellow envelope under the door, just as I had requested. I waited calmly for the sounds of retreating footsteps before putting on a pair of gloves to handle the letter. It was addressed to me, simply by my first name and without an address. Carefully, I opened the envelope and revealed a birthday card. I hadn't received one in years. Bright, sparkling letters on the front read, "Daughter, you are 27. I laughed at the sick joke. I hadn't received a birthday card since childhood, and my father couldn't even know my birthday correctly. I didn't think he knew my address. Carefully, I opened it to read the message inside. "Emily, if you're reading this, your father has killed me. Don't believe anything he or the police say. I wasn't the target of a random attack. I didn't die of natural causes, and I certainly didn't take my own life. I would never leave you if I had the choice. The truth is, I died because I discovered the truth behind our family's curse and foolishly told your father. He had been part of a secret society all along, brought into my life to eliminate me, to eliminate us. What we have is not a curse, it's a gift of immense power. The power to heal, but also the power to harm. We gain our power at the age of 28, a number associated with independence, leadership, and self-reliance. An age where we can bear the responsibility that such power inevitably brings. It's a strong number, and you will gain great strength, although you've always been a strong girl. I hope you've made it this far, but at the same time, I know you have. You were always a fighting little girl in the 4 years I had the pleasure of knowing and loving you. You never let anyone tell you what to think or do, especially not your father. Happy birthday. I love you. Mom." I quietly closed the card and pondered my sister's tense words. Mom had tried to warn them, but they hadn't listened. The pieces fit together. My father must have murdered Miriam, and Johanna took her life out of grief and the belief that she would inevitably be next. At the time of writing, I had only 2 hours and 32 minutes left until I officially turned 28. In the last hour or so, I'd already begun to feel the power flowing through my body, electrifying as it coursed through my veins. I needed to reposition the towel, and it did so on its own, slipping off the floor. I have to get to safety by 9:26 a.m., I realized. I planned to surprise my father on my birthday. Last Sunday at 9:26 a.m., I turned 28. I guess that sounds pretty uneventful on its own, but I grew up believing I was doomed to die at 27 like the other women in my family. It turned out the curse was just a way to cover the truth, that I would develop extraordinary powers at 28. My father had killed my mother and at least one of my sisters. Now, I wanted to end my story there, but I guess I underestimated how hungry you all were for a revenge story. I wish I could say that what I'm about to tell you is just that. A simple revenge story, perfectly executed. A gaping generational wound neatly closed with a few stitches. After being lied to my entire life, I value honesty. I won't lie to you. If that's what you're looking for, I suggest you stop reading now, because a completely new source of terror has come to light. After reading my birthday card last week, I anxiously waited until the clock reached 9:26 a.m. I had already felt the power slowly flowing into me early in the morning, but as soon as the second hand made a full rotation, moving the minute hand to the tick right after 5, a surge of energy coursed through me. It was almost painful, like imagining what it feels like to be struck by lightning, but at the same time it felt good. I felt important, powerful, strong. So strong that it even scared me. As I embraced the full extent of my powers, I found myself in what I can only describe as a vision, an alternate setting materializing around me. Logically, I knew I was still standing in my living room, my feet firmly on the familiar hardwood floor, but the ground beneath me felt rough, uneven, gritty. I looked down and realized I was standing on a shelf made of sandy rock, just a few steps away from the edge of a large cliff. Fear left me speechless at the top of this cliff, and I swear I could feel the wind whipping around me, the waves crashing violently below, the salty seawater spraying my face. I leaned forward and looked dangerously over the edge at the bubbling sea and its endless black and white foam. I found its movement, back and forth, pushing and pulling, comforting in its predictability, until it seemed like something was shifting to disrupt the flow, something unseen, but whose effects couldn't be denied. There was something below, something big enough to alter the tides, yet hidden beneath the waves. Even more terrifying was the tangible feeling that something wanted me to jump, to plunge headfirst into the dark sea. I felt a presence beneath the water, something ancient, unseen, far more powerful than I could ever hope to be. And whatever it was, it wanted me to jump. But it didn't have to force me. It had all the time in the world and could wait. The vision disintegrated as quickly as it had materialized, my comfortable reality reconstructing itself within seconds. I shook my head frantically to rid myself of the disturbing image, freeing myself from the powerful pull it had exerted on me. I had a mission to fulfill, but first I had to figure out exactly what I could do. I knew I could move things simply with sheer willpower, but I was surprised by the sudden ease. I focused on a glass of water on the table, trying to move it slightly to the left, but instead it flew off the surface, shattering as it hit the wall. I hurried to clean up the chaos, picking glass shards out of the carpet, groaning over the wet spot. To my surprise, as I looked at the damp carpet, droplets of liquid began to rise from the floor until the spot was gone, the condensation floating in the air. It's hard to explain, but I just moved it until I finally poured the water into the sink. Before you say anything, I know, it was stupid to test that on something so fragile, but my powers didn't exactly come with a user manual. A dull ache grew in my heart as I realized I should have learned this with my mother, and I longed for her more than I had in years. Like a little child desperately reaching out with arms stretched high, I wanted my mom. I couldn't help but think of the fear I first felt when I got my period. It sounds silly, but I bled and thought I was going to die, simply because I didn't have my mom there to explain it to me. And my father couldn't be bothered to raise his child. My father, the thought of him came with overwhelming rage. With my senses alive in a way they had never been before, I felt every cell in my body filled with kinetic energy until the light bulb in the lamp next to me blew out. I hesitated as I pondered the vision, but none of that was important right now. It was time to pay my old man a visit. Although he could never thank me for the losses I had endured, I planned to take the one thing that would come close, to end his miserable life. I went to my room to pack a small bag, but before I knew it, I slammed my head against my bedroom door. "Shit," I muttered, rubbing a palm over what would surely be a bump on my forehead. I then thought I could move much faster now, that I needed to be careful. This made preparing for my spontaneous journey easier, so I was much quicker downstairs in the garage. I slid into my car and inserted the key into the ignition. A familiar paranoia forced me to hesitate before opening the garage door, but I pushed it through just as I pressed the button to face the outside world for the first time in a year, squinting as the morning light streamed into the dark space. I guess I had forgotten how bright the sun really is. I opened the glove compartment to grab a pair of sunglasses. I put them on before driving out of the garage, out of the safety I had clung to for so long. The drive was fairly ordinary, although fear set in as I thought about all the unanswered questions. Why did my father kill my family? Why lie about the curse? And most disturbingly, who had delivered the letter? Was it just a trick to lure me out of hiding? Had I walked into a trap? To avoid sinking deeper into uncertainty, fear, and worry, I spent some time reflecting on my past. The death of my mother, and then both of my sisters, days apart, years later. I remembered how I soon turned to my father in a desperate plea for acceptance, for love from my only remaining family member. Then, I thought of his hateful response and the traumatic attack I suffered weeks later, solidifying my decision to cut all ties and move away. We hadn't spoken in all those years, but I was ready to confront him. At least, I hoped to. I couldn't be sure what awaited me, not at all. 6 hours later, I parked on the street across from our old family home, where his old Chevrolet stood in the driveway. I took a moment to compose myself at his front door, tightening my ponytail as I prepared myself for the impending task. Then, I channeled my energy into the barrier until it exploded inward, causing my body to be propelled at full speed into the living room, where I knew I'd find him. As expected, he was sitting there. What I didn't expect to see was the gun he held to his head. I mentally grabbed it, throwing it across the room. Emily?" he stammered with a dumb look on his face. What the hell are you doing here?" "What the hell are you doing, Father?" I retorted, pointing to the spot where the gun had fallen, nodding my head. "How did you find me? Why did you send the letter?" A perplexed expression crossed his face, one that told me he had no idea what I meant. His lack of knowledge did little to comfort me. Someone had found me anyway, had pulled me out of hiding. At that moment, I believe he realized the situation he was in, what I was planning. He began to rise from his chair, but I directed my attention to his body, pushing him back in. "You must not go, Father," I hissed. He coughed as I increased the pressure on his chest. "For the first time, you will listen to me." He struggled against my influence, but he was trapped, and he knew it. "I know you killed Mom and Miriam, maybe Johanna too. I know you lied about the damn curse," I began, a spark of anger rising as I spoke the harsh truth aloud. "But the question I can't turn away from is, why? Why wait so long to kill us? Why kill us at all?" He hesitantly glanced around the room, searching for an escape. I stared at his hands in his lap, then focused on his thumb, filling it with my energy until the bones within cracked, an ivory shard piercing through his flesh. As I directed my gaze to his index finger, he howled in pain and cried out, "No, leave." Number okay. Shit. He took a deep breath as blood streamed from his mutilated finger. I should have had a son. When your mother couldn't provide one, I was told I should kill her, wait to see if you or your sisters could have a son. I just did what I was told. A cowardly response from a cowardly man. "Who told you?" I pressed, slowly pulling his finger back, waiting. He didn't answer until I cracked his finger at the ankle. "But please," he pleaded, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. He looked at his mutilated hand, horrified as his middle finger began to raise next. "Some kind of cult. They breed the women in your bloodline. The women are killed under the curse, and their sons quietly taken. I don't know what they want with them, but they said all I had to do was give them a son, then kill your mother, your sisters, you, and I'd be secured for life. But you and your sisters, you bastards, you didn't have any children, especially not you. When you told me you rebelled against God, it became clear to me that you wouldn't have children, that you were the only one, so I took matters into my own hands. With that statement, I crushed his entire hand against me, his split bones jutting out in all directions. You don't mean... I gasped, my voice breaking, despite my efforts not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. He groaned in pain before letting out a deep, throaty laugh. You didn't think this attack was random, did you? He asked, panting. Hard memories of the brutal invasion imposed on me, the assault I suffered, all resurfaced at once, suddenly taking on new meaning as I understood my father's role in my trauma, that he had sent my attacker. Both my focus and my hold on him broke. He sprang up, surprisingly quick on his feet after years of sedentary alcoholism. I tried to get him back into his original position, but I couldn't. I felt like a little girl ducking under stairs as her father's shadow loomed closer. I was weak, powerless, once again in the presence of my father, a man who had done nothing but harm me, a man who had ruined my life in more ways than I could ever know. I tore after him, through the kitchen and the hallway, until I finally cornered him, holding him tightly and slamming him against a wall. A salty smell filled the air as a wind swept through. Did you feel like a big damn man taking everything from me? Killing my mother? Taking my sisters? I screamed in an inhuman roar. An incomprehensible power flowed in and out of me. I saw the bones in his feet suddenly crush everything. He howled as the crunching climbed up his lower legs, his knees cracking, then further. As his thigh bones shattered in a cruel, complex fracture, his mouth simply hung open. Did you feel strong and despite the enormous power flowing through me, I fell silent, unable to finish the sentence, unable to pronounce it aloud. Your own damn child, Father. I took a deep, calming breath before forcing the flesh of his face in opposite directions. A crack first formed down the center of his forehead, then split across the bridge of his nose, tearing his face into two parts. Your little plan worked, Father. I got pregnant. I got rid of it, of course. I teased, leaning forward to quietly add, I wonder if it was a boy. He opened his mouth to strike back, but I had stopped listening. Do they know I'm alive? I demanded, widening the growing cut until both sides were completely separated. They didn't know, he stammered, blood dripping from his open mouth. But they will now, damn it, and they were already on their way. He was right. It wasn't smart to stay. I pulled the knife from my waistband, positioned the blade at one side of his neck before slicing it across his throat until I had cut him from ear to ear. Relief was short-lived. I returned to my car and immediately drove back home. I needed answers, and I needed them yesterday. I couldn't ignore the power of the illusion I'd experienced that morning any longer. I hesitate to admit it even now, but I found myself back on that cliff in my father's house. The roaring waves crashing against the rocks drew me in, forcing me to step to the edge, forcing me to stare down at the vast sea below. A feeling of unbridled hatred spread from there. This time, I didn't try to free myself from the strange vision. This time, I welcomed it, and I lost myself for a moment, overwhelmed by uncontrollable power, a mere spectator as her lower half was mutilated. More than that, I said I wouldn't lie to you, and I won't, but I lied to my father. I didn't get rid of my child the way I hinted I had. Part of me wanted to prove that I could be a better parent than him, but I knew I couldn't. So I gave him away. I sped endlessly down the highway towards home, much more terrified than when I had left. I had to find the source of the letter. I had to figure out what the visions meant. I had to know if I had inadvertently exposed myself to something evil. And more importantly, I had to know that my child was safe from the cult that so desperately wanted him. I have to find my son. After my now-deceased father revealed that a cult bred the women in my bloodline for sons, I feared for my own child. During the long drive back home, accelerating well over the speed limit but somehow still not fast enough, questions plagued me. What could they possibly want with him? Had they already found him? What would they do to him? Or what had they already done? They had already orchestrated the murders of my sisters and mother. I wouldn't blame them for wanting to harm him, or me, now that they had surely found the mutilated body I had left behind. I didn't mention my son immediately because I don't believe I had the right to call myself his mother. I had brought him into the world almost 4 years ago, but I certainly had no part in raising him. I never expected to become pregnant in my life, and I certainly never expected to carry a pregnancy resulting from an assault, but part of me wanted to prove that I could be a better parent than my father. In the months leading up to his birth, I knew I couldn't be that for him. I was afraid I would end up like my father, and it felt selfish to subject my child to the same grief I experienced when I lost my mother so young. Back then, I thought I still had an expiration date. I gave him to a couple who couldn't afford children themselves. They were overjoyed to take him in. I didn't want him to hang around and get confused, but his new parents agreed to maintain contact in case of a medical emergency. I clung to this glimmer of hope on the drive home, knowing that once I returned, I just had to find their contact information. It didn't take long. Minutes after I drove into my garage, I was already dialing their number. I whispered please into the phone as I waited for their response. It was already late, but it couldn't wait until morning. The line had almost gone to voicemail when a confused woman answered with a sleepy greeting. Words immediately poured out of my mouth like vomit, jumbled and hurried. I didn't want to tell her what had happened that day, so I just said I had a bad feeling about her son, that I needed to know if he was okay. Her long, exhausted sigh and hesitation to respond made my heart race. When she finally spoke, my blood ran cold. She apologized and said he had been placed with another family a year ago due to unexpected behavioral problems, mainly because he broke things, no matter how closely they watched him. She tried to calm me by insisting that they went through an agency actively seeking problem children, that he had been placed with a family capable of handling the challenges. She couldn't say much about his new family, but she knew he was still in state custody. Her answers were annoyingly vague and non-committal. I knew I wouldn't get much more from her, so I hung up after she agreed to send me all the information about the adoption and the agency's name. A simple Google search made it clear that it wasn't even a real organization. I spent the next few hours desperately searching for my son's whereabouts, leaving frantic messages at every agency I could find, though I knew they wouldn't hear them until morning. I tried to convince myself that maybe the agency had simply been renamed, but that seemed unlikely. I was desperate and scared for my child. A part of me just knew the cult already had him. It took over a week of trail searching, but I'm overjoyed to say I actually found my son's location with the scant information I had. He was still in state custody, but I live in a pretty large state, so another long journey awaited. I contacted his new mother, who agreed to a visit just to check on him. I thought maybe she understood the whole mother instinct thing. I packed my things and immediately got into my car. Only about 20 minutes later, I began to suspect it was most certainly a trap. I had a bad feeling about driving to my father, but back then, I had the element of surprise on my side, and that was certainly gone now. Pure fear coursed through my system during the entire drive, my hands trembling and barely able to grip the steering wheel. In the late afternoon, I arrived at a beautiful house. One of those houses that seem too good to be true. One of those houses you know only hides a facade of familial dysfunction. I know because I used to live in one such place. As I pulled up, I took a moment to prepare myself in the car, as if waiting in the wings, going over my lines one last time before going on stage. As I looked out, I swore for a moment that I saw a figure in the window, something pale watching. My blood ran cold. It seemed motionless as I saw it, just slightly tilting its head, curious. Nervously, I got out of the car and knocked on the door. A gaunt young woman in a white summer dress opened it. "Oh, hi, Emily?" she squeaked, visibly embarrassed. She combed her hand full of bony fingers through her tousled brown hair as she opened the door wide. "I'm Catherine. Come on in." Hesitantly, I trudged into the manor, carried by the thick soles of my combat boots, suddenly aware of how clumsy I looked compared to her. Lightly barefoot, she was so petite and delicate as a daisy, but a hollow look in her eyes made her wilted. She led me into a pristine kitchen, offering me a seat. "Sorry to bother you like this," I began awkwardly, clearing my throat. Where is he?" "Oh, he's upstairs," she replied, wandering around the room to fill a few glasses with water, playing with Lucy, his sister. Cool, I replied, going silent. I studied her facial features and noticed inwardly how similar we looked despite our obvious differences in mannerisms. Something seemed so familiar about her. As she turned to me to open a cupboard, everything became clear. A patch of freckles on the back of her left shoulder, the one I had always enthusiastically insisted looked exactly like the Virgo constellation. "Kathy," I breathed. She turned to me. A brief moment of clarity flickered behind her sunken eyes before it finally vanished. "Catherine." "Kathy," I pleaded. "It's me, your cousin, Emily. I know we haven't seen each other since childhood, but if you're trapped, I can help you. Please, come with me." She took a sharp breath, responding almost as if she had rehearsed it, reciting, "As the daughter of the cliff, it is my fate, my honor, my place in the order to be sacrificed." Before I could respond, she was already screaming loudly, "Help! Klaus!" I focused on her body, pushing her against the wall to hold her back, but the damage was already done. I heard hurried footsteps coming down the stairs. An older man suddenly appeared in the doorway. Despite the desperate expression on his face, I recognized him immediately from old family photos I had studied in my youth to get to know my mother better. "Damn it," I sighed, a failed attempt to hide my fear as I recognized him as my grandfather, my mother's father. I grabbed him immediately, freezing him in place, but found it difficult to focus on two living beings with free will at the same time. My grip wavered between the two until I could maintain a steady, albeit weaker, hold over both. But my focus completely deteriorated when a young boy slipped out from behind my grandfather. A pale young boy with chestnut brown hair and light hazel eyes full of curiosity. A boy who looked almost identical to me at my age, because he was mine. "Do it now," my grandfather demanded, wildly gesturing in my direction. The child hesitated for a moment before nodding silently. He gave me a steady look I immediately recognized, the one I had often used since acquiring my powers. I braced myself for impact, but all I felt was a slight vibration, a weakened version of my own abilities, I assumed. Carefully avoiding the young boy, I redirected my gaze back to my grandfather's body to catch him again in my grip. My heart nearly stopped as I tried to make contact with his form when I realized I had no power at all. I just looked like a stupid asshole staring at an old man, expecting something to happen. His reaction was also one of shock, but with an undertone of reverence. I knew it," he stammered, looking at my sudden powerlessness, his initial joy escalating into loud laughter. "It was always you." "The prophecy," Catherine mused, walking through the kitchen to get a better look. "The one who will end the daughters." She called Lucy before kneeling on the tiled floor in front of the boy and laying her forehead on the cool surface. A young girl, maybe a year older than my son, sprang up and followed her. The whole acting situation made me sick. "You mean to wipe us all out?" I snorted, using anger as a cover for my obvious powerlessness. "Your own family?" The older man simply raised his eyebrows as if to communicate that he had no qualms about doing so. As foretold, his complete detachment from humanity, the reality, made me tremble. I knew everything would be over if I didn't act quickly. I gently looked at the young boy. "Hey, what's your name, little guy?" Little guy. So I had always called him in my head. Simple. Little guy. He often popped into my mind during the most mundane tasks, and I had no name to call him. I thought I might ask what little guy was doing right now. I wondered if he was okay. I wondered if little guy was happy. I wondered if his family loved him. Confused, he blinked and stuttered, Eli. Eli, okay, I breathed, tightly pressing my lips together to hold back tears. I didn't want to tell you this way, Eli, but these people don't love you. They're using you to hurt innocent people like me. Like Catherine, like Lucy. They killed my mom, my sisters. Please let me go so I can take you to a safe place. She's a liar, Eli, the older man screamed, rampaging like an absolute madman. He drew an ornate blade from his belt. We have to take her down, knock them all down like the pests they are. His eyes filled, and I could almost feel the internal struggle raging within him. Tears finally began to streak down his face as the tingling started to fade. No, I like my sister. Eli's grip finally broke as he grabbed Lucy by the elbow to flee the room. I filled the old man with my energy until he couldn't move anymore, motionless like a statue. Focusing my attention on the knife, I snatched it from him and held it in the air. I took a deep, calming breath before launching it in his direction. The blade was already outside my mental grip when I realized Catherine had stood up from the ground to jump in front of the man. The weapon dug deep into her throat, immediately bringing her to the ground. I tried to help her, only to realize I had never healed her, and I certainly didn't know how. She brushed off my vague attempts as she pulled the knife out. I watched in horror as she thrust the blade back into her chest and collapsed, gasping. A delighted grin spread across her face in her final moments. An overwhelming rage erupted within me, both at my grandfather and at myself for Catherine's death. I closed my eyes to calm my emotions, but found myself immediately back on that cliff as I opened them, kneeling at the edge. Whipping winds whipped my face as I stared at the bubbling black rapids below. Just beneath the surface, I could get a clearer view of the shadowy mass below, dynamic in its form, stretching and moving in every direction. Constantly in motion, amorphous and vague, yet clearly part of a collective intelligence. Whistling whispers rose from below, individual words indecipherable, but the message entirely clear. Jump. I shook my head angrily in response to the command to free myself from its enticing pull. Reality materialized around me again. A pool of blood had spread beneath me, soaking the knees of my jeans. As the waves pulled away, I heard a deep, throaty groan behind me. I turned around and found my grandfather in pieces on the ground, still alive, but obviously in agony. His upper half was separated from his legs, lying motionless across the room. Slimy, visceral blood dripped from where he had been torn apart, shredded and uneven. I stood up to finish him off, although I must admit I didn't even know I had started. He whimpered as I followed the blood trail to him, but exchanged cowardice for anger as I crouched beside him. They will find you," he insisted through clenched teeth. His face was pale and covered in sweat, as foretold. "Leave them," I hissed, before channeling all my energy into his neck, breaking it with such force that his head nearly spun. "As foretold, my ass." "Emily, who is that?" Lucy squeaked from the back seat. I hadn't even noticed that I'd stopped in the middle of the street. I swallowed my fear, drove into the driveway, and got out of the car. I ordered the children to stay inside, locked the doors, and approached the stranger. "Excuse me?" I barked, trying to appear confident. I wasn't even exactly with my powers from the barn, so I was afraid of what could happen. "Who are you? Why are you here?" The man turned to me, a grin on his face. "Emily," he replied almost nostalgically, as if he knew me. I was sure I had never seen him before, and I believe I would have recognized him if I had, given the pink scar on his left cheek. He had the rugged, tough look of a man who'd seen too much. "Answer me," I demanded, keeping my gaze fixed on him. If he made any sudden movements, I had to be ready. He stood still, seemingly attuned to my concern. "It's me, Emily. It's Uncle John." I couldn't help but laugh at whatever hallucination he was playing, while hardening my gaze and freezing him. I hadn't seen Uncle John since my childhood, but my memory wasn't bad. He was my mother's twin. He had the same patch of freckles across his pale face and light brown hair that she had, which I have too. With his olive skin and tight salt and pepper crew cut, the man in front of me didn't look like John at all, nor like anyone in my family. "Let's try again," I breathed, slowly approaching the stranger. "Tell me the truth." I could feel a flicker of fear in him and in myself too. If they had found me, I knew I was screwed, but I had to deal with it later. The man remained silent for a few long moments, and then he began to sing. All the little girls dancing on the cliff's edge, all their little bracelets clinking in the wind. He started, the melody cheerful, oddly familiar. All the little girls suddenly stop their dance, and all the little girls jump into the sea. I finished, my eyes filled with tears. An old nursery rhyme I didn't even know I had kept, one that Uncle John had taught me while we reenacted scenes with my dolls. I released my grip on him. Why did you come?" "I'm here to help, Lena. They're after you. It won't be long before they find what they're looking for." He sighed and nodded towards the car, towards Eli. I knew I had to stay vigilant, could trust no one in the family anymore, but he was always so kind, so gentle. Nothing like my father. Something in him seemed real. I made a split-second decision to trust him. I led the children out of the car into the house and let John inside. I was afraid I had made the wrong choice, but thought I could at least utilize the full extent of my powers if I needed to behind closed doors. I believe John knew that too. After bringing the children to nap in my room, John spent the next few weeks infiltrating the Fathers of the Cliff to determine the location of their headquarters. He insisted that many young boys were held there, guarded by the Fathers. He painted a horrific picture of the abuse he endured there, the indoctrination forced upon him. Between strategizing with John and playing with the children, I spent long hours training myself and strengthening my discipline. After putting the children to bed one evening, guilt plagued me, reminding me of how Catherine had died at my hands, how I couldn't heal her. I chased the memory away with 6 shots of vodka and spent the rest of the night alternately dragging a razor blade across my skin and trying to close the wounds to calm my mind. I have to admit, despite the powers at my disposal, I was scared to face so many people determined to jeopardize my survival. It was hard enough controlling 2 people last time. I was afraid how I would hold up against the dozens of men John estimated were waiting for me. But I knew I had to try if what he said was truly true. When John shot out of his seat last week, I knew immediately he had found what he was looking for. He had been sitting at his chair in front of his computer for so long that I thought he had gotten used to it. My unease soared to new heights as I realized he had found the place where I would meet my fate, whether good or bad. He called me over to show me his screen. He had entered the address to display an image of my target, a sprawling green lawn in front, a towering white manor house. It was almost a day's drive away, but within reach, and although I was insanely scared of what I might encounter there, I wanted to go. I had to end what I had started. John and I made arrangements to leave the next morning, although we argued about how to handle the children. I trusted no one to watch them, but I refused to take them with me. They wanted Eli more than they wanted me, and I knew they wouldn't hesitate to kill Lucy. There seemed to be no solution. I insisted on going alone, but John wouldn't listen. We decided to settle it in the morning, so I put the children to bed while John lay down on the couch to rest. I crept out of the house in the middle of the night. It was certainly a risk to leave the children with John, but I had realized he was the only person I could trust. I feared again that this was a mistake, but I prayed it wasn't. I set my course for the manor house that housed the fathers of the cliff and quietly drove out of the driveway. As I neared my destination, I panicked, became shaky. I had stopped to take a nap in my car, but it was restless sleep. Still, the faster I finished with the fathers, the quicker I could return home. I parked about a mile away and decided to walk the rest of the way on foot. The estate was even more magnificent in person than the pixels on John's screen could ever depict. I felt overwhelmed by its size and feared it was like a giant robber, whose enormous arched door was the mouth I willingly walked toward. This time, however, I wasn't looking for answers, wouldn't ask questions. John had told me where to go to rescue the children. I pushed open the door and found a large entryway with 2 marble stairs leading to an overhang on the 2nd floor. A man stood, frozen, on one of the steps. I grabbed his neck without hesitation. Within seconds, more men flooded onto the 2nd floor balcony before descending the stairs. One drew a weapon, aiming it at my chest. I deflected his aim before forcing him to unload the barrel into his mouth. I forced another off the overhang, slamming him face first into the marble floor. But they kept coming, one after another, closer and closer. I killed a few more by dropping the chandelier from the ceiling to crush them, but just as I felt I was gaining the upper hand, more men descended the stairs. More approached me from the hallways on both sides. Panicked, overwhelmed, and terrified, I felt a pair of arms grab me from behind, saw the horde of men approaching me, their faces twisted with hatred and disgust. I pushed as many of them away as I could, but I was only buying time. And I barely did, given the many surrounding me, too many to control alone. Every attempt grew weaker, as I quickly fatigued. I knew it was then over, but as I began to accept my fate, I heard the faint sounds of waves crashing against hard rocks, the wind whistling everywhere. My surroundings began to fade, giving way to that same old scene that had haunted me since I first received my powers. There was the rocky shelf, the bubbling black rapids below, the whipping wind. But this time, there was something else. Something that shook me to my core. There were girls, not just little girls, but also teenagers and young women, all in flowing white dresses with shiny silver bracelets on their wrists. At first glance, it almost looked like they were dancing, constantly moving in pairs, changing partners. All the little girls dancing on the cliff's edge. Their terrified faces made it clear this wasn't a joyous occasion. They bid farewell. Their dresses fluttered in the wind as they listened quietly to each other, tears streaking their faces. Instead of hugging, they gently reached for each other's hands before moving on to the next. That was all they could do. Their wrists were bound. All the little girls, bracelets clinking in the wind. A man's roar shattered the tragic scene, startling both me and the group on the cliff. Directly behind me, a group of men began approaching the women and girls in white, knives in hand. I jumped back at the sight, but they didn't seem to notice me, seemed only to see or care about the women and girls in white. All the little girls suddenly stopped their dance. They moved on as the first girl jumped, relentless in their pursuit until they all, screaming in terror, leapt off the cliff. And all the little girls jump into the sea. I ran forward to peer over the edge of the cliff, horrified as the girls frantically tumbled into the water, drowning. Their collective fear, desperation, and anger overwhelmed me, almost suffocating me with the force of their emotions. Howling, I slammed a fist into the rough rocks below as they individually grew weary, their bodies beginning to sink deep beneath the surface. The sea enveloped them until it looked just like before, the dark, bubbling rapids, so terrifying, yet at the same time, so inviting. There was no time for doubt. I threw my arms over my head and plunged off the cliff. I fell headfirst into the fresh, salty water. As the sea fully engulfed me, I dove deeper, closer to what had been pulling me down all along. I forced my eyes open, pulled myself back when I realized I wasn't alone. The fallen girls and women swam around me in a storm, their corpses now bloated and discolored, flesh peeling and hanging from the bones in several places. The original daughters of the cliff, forced to jump off the cliff before they could develop their powers. I kept pushing deeper into the dark water, almost opening my mouth to gasp as I saw Miriam and Johanna swimming beside me, their grotesque appearances still horrifying, though their presence was oddly comforting. Miriam stretched out a finger to indicate. I followed the trajectory with burning eyes. All my doubts abruptly ceased when a figure entered my field of vision. It was my mother. Radiant, she extended her hand from the depths. I reached out mine in hopes of speeding up the connection. As soon as my hand touched hers, a wave of electric energy surged through me, startling me. She nodded encouragingly, and I held tightly to her hand. I returned with a piercing scream to reality in the father's manner. The men retreated, their hands covering their ears. A power I had never known or felt flowed through me, flowed out of me as I faced each of my attackers with renewed energy. I felt my hand penetrate one man's chest, still hammering his heart within. I felt my energy flow into another attacker's brain, so much energy that it overheated and exploded, blood dripping from his ears as he fell to the ground. I felt myself cutting through 5, 10, 15 more attackers with less energy than it took to flip a light switch. With my attackers dealt with, I took a deep breath in and slowly out, the rage and power bestowed upon me by the daughters of the cliff flowing out. I had to keep control when I found the children, though I feared a second wave of fathers was likely waiting for me. As I crept quietly through the room, I noticed one of my attackers still alive, his eyes wide and breath shallow. I turned my gaze to him, rotated his body, letting him drown in a thick pool of his comrade's blood. It seemed fitting. I followed John's instructions along the hallway to a locked door. I picked the lock with a sharp look, crept down the stairs, opening the door anxiously, fearing what might await me. What I saw there, well, it was much worse than I had ever expected. The room was nearly empty, no children, no people except for a man who sat there, waiting. He simply laughed at my shocked expression, my fear for the children. Not what you expected? My heart began to race. It was indeed a trap. John had lied, and I had left my children with him. You're just like all the other daughters. You think you're so clever, think you're better than us, he babbled, shaking his head in disbelief. We knew you'd find us, knew you'd be too dumb to come here to kill yourself. We've placed all the boys in families. We couldn't risk you coming here to slaughter them all. The prophecy will be fulfilled as foretold. It was my turn to laugh, to mock his assumption that I had come to kill innocent children. The prophecy is fulfilled, all clear, I murmured, immobilizing him in my grip. I didn't know what tricks he might have up his sleeve, so I couldn't be too careful. My son is the prophecy, but he's stronger, smarter, and more compassionate than any of you. When the moment of truth came, he thought for himself. He let me go. The cycle is ended. You're wrong, he spat, staring. The others are still out there. They'll keep breeding and killing all the girls born in the future? All, every girl now living. I stuttered, looking sadly, fearfully at Lucy. You're telling me you'll kill that little girl over there right now? The older man simply raised his eyebrows, as if to communicate that he had no qualms about doing so. As foretold, his complete detachment from humanity, the reality, made me tremble. I knew everything would be over if I didn't act quickly. I gently looked at the young boy. Hey, what's your name, little guy? Little guy. So I had always called him in my head, simple, little guy. He often popped into my mind during the most mundane tasks, and I had no name to call him. I thought I might ask what little guy was doing right now. I wondered if he was okay. I wondered if little guy was happy. I wondered if his family loved him. Confused, he blinked and stuttered, Eli. Eli, okay, I breathed, tightly pressing my lips together to hold back tears. I didn't want to tell you this way, Eli, but these people don't love you. They're using you to hurt innocent people like me, like Catherine, like Lucy. They killed my mom, my sisters. Please, please let me go so I can take you to a safe place. She's a liar, Eli, the older man screamed, rampaging like an absolute madman. He drew an ornate blade from his belt. We have to take her down, knock them all down, like the pests they are. His eyes filled, and I could almost feel the internal struggle raging within him. Tears finally began to streak down his face as the tingling started to fade. No, I like my sister. Eli's grip finally broke as he grabbed Lucy by the elbow to flee the room. I filled the old man with my energy until he couldn't move anymore, motionless like a statue. Focusing my attention on the knife, I snatched it from him and held it in the air. I took a deep, calming breath before launching it in his direction. The blade was already outside my mental grip when I realized Catherine had stood up from the ground to jump in front of the man. The weapon dug deep into her throat, immediately bringing her to the ground. I tried to help her, only to realize I had never healed her, and I certainly didn't know how. She brushed off my vague attempts as she pulled the knife out. I watched in horror as she thrust the blade back into her chest and collapsed, gasping. A delighted grin spread across her face in her final moments. An overwhelming rage erupted within me, both at my grandfather and at myself for Catherine's death. I closed my eyes to calm my emotions, but found myself immediately back on that cliff as I opened them, kneeling at the edge. Whipping winds whipped my face as I stared at the bubbling black rapids below. Just beneath the surface, I could get a clearer view of the shadowy mass below, dynamic in its form, stretching and moving in every direction, constantly in motion, amorphous and vague, yet clearly part of a collective intelligence. Whistling whispers rose from below, individual words indecipherable, but the message entirely clear: jump. I shook my head angrily in response to the command to free myself from its enticing pull. Reality materialized around me again. A pool of blood had spread beneath me, soaking the knees of my jeans. As the waves pulled away, I heard a deep, throaty groan behind me. I turned around and found my grandfather in pieces on the ground, still alive, but obviously in agony. His upper half was separated from his legs, lying motionless across the room. Slimy, visceral blood dripped from where he had been torn apart, shredded and uneven. I stood up to finish him off, although I must admit I didn't even know I had started. He whimpered as I followed the blood trail to him, but exchanged cowardice for anger as I crouched beside him. They will find you," he insisted through clenched teeth. His face was pale and covered in sweat. "As foretold." "Leave them," I hissed, before channeling all my energy into his neck, breaking it with such force that his head nearly spun. "As foretold, my ass." "Emily, who is that?" Lucy squeaked from the back seat. I hadn't even noticed that I had stopped in the middle of the street. I swallowed my fear, drove into the driveway and got out of the car. I ordered the children to stay inside, locked the doors, and approached the stranger. "Excuse me," I barked, trying to appear confident. I wasn't even exactly with my powers from the barn, so I was afraid of what could happen. "Who are you? Why are you here?" The man turned to me, a grin on his face. "Emily," he replied almost nostalgically, as if he knew me. I was sure I had never seen him before, and I believe I would have recognized him if I had, given the pink scar on his left cheek. He had the rugged, tough look of a man who'd seen too much. "Answer me," I demanded, keeping my gaze fixed on him. If he made any sudden movements, I had to be ready. He stood still, seemingly attuned to my concern. "It's me, Emily. It's Uncle John." I couldn't help but laugh at whatever hallucination he was playing, while hardening my gaze and freezing him. I hadn't seen Uncle John since my childhood, but my memory wasn't bad. He was my mother's twin. He had the same patch of freckles across his pale face and light brown hair that she had, which I have too. With his olive skin and tight salt and pepper crew cut, the man in front of me didn't look like John at all, nor like anyone in my family. "Let's try again," I breathed, slowly approaching the stranger. "Tell me the truth." I could feel a flicker of fear in him and in myself too. If they had found me, I knew I was screwed, but I had to deal with it later. The man remained silent for a few long moments, and then he began to sing. All the little girls dancing on the cliff's edge, all their little bracelets clinking in the wind, he started. The melody cheerful, oddly familiar. All the little girls suddenly stopped their dance. "And all the little girls jump into the sea," I finished, my eyes filled with tears. An old nursery rhyme I didn't even know I had kept, one that Uncle John had taught me while we reenacted scenes with my dolls. I released my grip on him. "Why? Why did you come?" "I'm here to help, Lena. They're after you. It won't be long before they find what they're looking for." He sighed and nodded towards the car, towards Eli. I knew I had to stay vigilant, could trust no one in the family anymore, but he was always so kind, so gentle. Nothing like my father. Something in him seemed real. I made a split-second decision to trust him. I led the children out of the car into the house and let John inside. I was afraid I had made the wrong choice, but thought I could at least utilize the full extent of my powers if I needed to behind closed doors. I believe John knew that too. After bringing the children to nap in my room, John spent the next few weeks infiltrating the Fathers of the Cliff to determine the location of their headquarters. He insisted that many young boys were held there, guarded by the Fathers. He painted a horrific picture of the abuse he endured there, the indoctrination forced upon him. Between strategizing with John and playing with the children, I spent long hours training myself and strengthening my discipline. After putting the children to bed one evening, guilt plagued me, reminding me of how Catherine had died at my hands, how I couldn't heal her. I chased the memory away with 6 shots of vodka and spent the rest of the night alternately dragging a razor blade across my skin and trying to close the wounds to calm my mind. I have to admit, despite the powers at my disposal, I was scared to face so many people determined to jeopardize my survival. It was hard enough controlling 2 people last time. I was afraid how I would hold up against the dozens of men John estimated were waiting for me. But I knew I had to try if what he said was truly true. When John shot out of his seat last week, I knew immediately he had found what he was looking for. He had been sitting at his chair in front of his computer for so long that I thought he had gotten used to it. My unease soared to new heights as I realized he had found the place where I would meet my fate, whether good or bad. He called me over to show me his screen. He had entered the address to display an image of my target. A sprawling green lawn in front, a towering white manor house. It was almost a day's drive away, but within reach. And although I was insanely scared of what I might encounter there, I wanted to go. I had to end what I had started. John and I made arrangements to leave the next morning, although we argued about how to handle the children. I trusted no one to watch them, but I refused to take them with me. They wanted Eli more than they wanted me, and I knew they wouldn't hesitate to kill Lucy. There seemed to be no solution. I insisted on going alone, but John wouldn't listen. We decided to settle it in the morning, so I put the children to bed while John lay down on the couch to rest. I crept out of the house in the middle of the night. It was certainly a risk to leave the children with John, but I had realized he was the only person I could trust. I feared again that this was a mistake, but I prayed it wasn't. I set my course for the manor house that housed the Fathers of the Cliff and quietly drove out of the driveway. After all the chaos and confrontations, I realized the truth. There were still more out there. More fathers wanting to harm my family. More innocent children in their grasp. I used my powers to extract information from my captive, healed him just as he began to slip away, and knew that my fight was far from over. With John and the children safe for now, I vowed to continue battling the cult that sought to fulfill their dark prophecy, ensuring that every daughter of the Cliff would live to see her 28th birthday. When my mother and father retired, they bought a house in a small town in Ohio and left me responsible for the family home. I didn't mind. It was better than trying to buy something on my own. Still, a 2-story house for a single man in his early 30s. That was a bit much. I lost my job during the pandemic, and with rising prices, I decided to rent out parts of the house I wasn't using. Upstairs had enough space to accommodate at least a few college students, and a spacious basement for more. A large 1-bedroom basement that practically covered the entire lower level of the building, supported by thick concrete beams. It wasn't the kind of place I would normally rent out, but I thought it couldn't hurt to offer it, provided I was honest about its condition. I spent a good month preparing the spaces. I emptied the upstairs and moved things from the basement to long-term storage. At first, it seemed like we had water damage to fix, but it turned out to be a false alarm. Overall, the transition was relatively painless, and the rent would keep me afloat until I found a new job. I posted an ad on several social networks, one for the upstairs space, big enough for at least a few people, and then the basement. I wasn't entirely sure about the basement, but I added a few pictures and hoped for the best. The price was also affordable. Affordable, more than it should have been, I guess. I received some applications for the upstairs space, but most were either very short-term or started haggling over the price. A man simply showed up and tried to come in directly without calling first. It was a strange time. However, I got no calls for the basement, so I thought I had messed it up. It was early October when I heard a knock on the door, the classic knocking sound, knock, knock, knock. I hurried to open the door while still browsing job listings on my phone and chewing on a piece of cold pizza from last week. It's hard to explain how surprised I was by what I saw. Most of the other applicants were either young men or female students. What stood before me was a family of 4, a mother and father, both in their mid-40s, and 2 young boys aged 10 and 14. The mother, Lisa, was wearing a fall-colored cotton dress with a small bow, and the father, David, had a stylish black coat, a white shirt, and a red tie. Both children, Ethan, 12, and Jacob, 13, were dressed in identical blue shirts. At first, I thought they were here to convert me to something. I could easily imagine they came with Bibles. Instead, David stepped forward and offered his hand in greeting. I shook it. "Hello," he said with a warm smile. "We're the Parkers. We're here about the listing." "Oh, hi," I replied. "It might be a bit crowded, but feel free to take a look. Sorry for the, I vaguely gestured to my unprepared state, but David just shook his head. "No problem. Hopefully we're not disturbing anything." I invited them in, and they went straight past the stairs. I thought they had simply missed them. "Sorry," I said. "It's right up here." "Oh, we know," Lisa smiled. "We're here for the basement." So there's this long wooden staircase that spirals down to the basement. One of the main reasons I didn't like going down or setting up the place, the spiral makes it almost impossible to bring down any proper furniture. It's frustrating. But all 4 members of this seemingly perfect family went down, all composed. They were polite and respectful, with just the right amount of enthusiasm, but I had a feeling something was just off. David pulled out a measuring tape and began measuring the walls. They asked me about the lack of windows, the air quality, their ability to bring down furniture and install some lighting. I agreed to everything. I still couldn't believe they were actually considering it. It was clearly not a space intended for a family of 4, and they seemed to be fairly well off. There was no reason for them to rent such a space. Still, after they finished with their inquiries, Lisa approached me. "Would you mind going upstairs and walking around a bit?" she asked. "We'd like to see how the sound carries." A strange way to ask about soundproofing, but I did as they requested. I went up the stairs, put on my heaviest boots, and wandered around for a while. After a few minutes, I turned the corner and saw all 4 of them standing in the hallway, as always, perfectly put together, all with big smiles on their faces. "We're very satisfied," Lisa said. "We'll take it." They signed a 6-month lease, and I got to know them a little better in the weeks that followed as they dropped by sporadically. There was David, the father, Lisa, the mother, and the boys, Ethan and Jacob. Apparently, they were between 2 apartments and wanted something small and affordable for the meantime. Despite everything, I couldn't shake the feeling that a basement was a strange choice for them. Still, I needed the money, and they were eager to finalize the deal. They even offered to pay a bit more since they were bringing more people than I had expected. About a week later, they came for the official move-in. Lisa and David insisted on bringing everything in themselves, so I wouldn't have to handle any heavy lifting. It was already a gesture of kindness to let them stay there. They brought in about a dozen pieces of furniture covered with blue tarps in various sizes, along with a dozen large boxes, none of them labeled. They laid out several hand-woven rugs, the kind you'd see in large homes. Lisa was a homemaker, while David worked as a security manager for Cleveland Airport. He had irregular hours, ranging from 12-hour shifts to night shifts and everything in between. He was also on call most of the day and sometimes had to leave on short notice. However, it was strange. One might think someone like him would need a space with good cell coverage, but this basement had barely any signal. There was Wi-Fi, but it was at best weak. For some reason, it didn't seem to bother them. The first week with the Parkers was no problem. Most of the time, I forgot they were even there. I saw them leave the basement only a few times, and they didn't make any noise. At most, I could hear them occasionally shuffling up or down the creaky old stairs, mostly when David went to work. In fact, I never saw Ethan and Jacob go to school. I suspected they were being homeschooled, which further reinforced the idea that this family might have a religious background. Still, they were hardly a problem. I continued working hard to find someone for the upstairs, but had no luck. I had considered lowering the price, but after the Parkers moved in, money became less of an issue. David even suggested I apply at the airport. I knew someone in HR who was looking for new hires in various departments. After 5 months of unemployment, I was ready to try almost anything. Nevertheless, I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't telling me the whole truth. A recurring thought: what the hell are they even doing down there? One day, I decided to take a look at what they had done with the place. By that time, I hadn't even seen how they had decorated it. It was mid-afternoon, and I didn't know if they were even downstairs or not. Their car was gone from the driveway. I knocked a few times, and when there was no answer, I used my key to go down. As I turned the corner, it was deathly quiet and completely dark. I turned on the light. They were all sleeping in simple single beds, spread out along the easternmost wall. They had a small corner sofa, along with a few simple plastic chairs, facing a bulky old TV mounted on the wall. There was an empty bookshelf and a few scattered rugs on the floor. I could see a few open boxes. Next to the stairs was a bathroom that looked unused. No toothbrushes or anything. It took a moment for me to realize I wasn't alone. The entire family stood in a row along the southernmost wall, furthest from the stairs. They stood in order of their height, from tallest to smallest, and remained completely still, only they were staring at me. Only when they noticed I was looking at them did they react. They all looked up at me and smiled kindly. "Can we help you?" Lisa asked. "I hope we're not making too much noise," David continued. The children simply nodded in unison. I looked at them closely but couldn't figure out what I was seeing. I had no explanation for their behavior. "Sorry, I just wanted to check the water pressure," I lied. I knocked. "That's okay," David smiled. "Just go ahead." As I walked up the stairs, a thought hit me. If they were all downstairs, why was their car gone? Who had taken it? In the following weeks, I had several strange encounters with them. For example, I once found Ethan, the younger of the two brothers, standing in the kitchen. He wasn't doing anything in particular, just standing there, staring at the spice rack. When I called him out, he just said he wasn't doing anything. After a while, he turned around and ran back downstairs. I didn't see it, but I heard his little feet scurrying down the stairs. Another time, I saw Lisa at the open door leading to the basement. She was just standing there, hand on the doorknob, looking directly at me. I said, "Hi," and she responded the same way, but didn't let me out of her sight. When I finally was out of her line of sight, I heard her run back downstairs. Not just quickly, she was running. Another time, I saw David in the car in the driveway. I saw him sitting in the window on the upstairs level. Just there, hands on the steering wheel for a good 15 minutes. No radio or anything, just him alone in the car. But the strangest encounter was one night when I went to the kitchen to get a Coke. I found Lisa standing in the kitchen, the refrigerator wide open. I could see her silhouette illuminated by the fridge light. Her long black hair damp from a fresh shower. Standing in a hastily tied bathrobe, barefoot. At first, I saw nothing strange. She was just standing there. She wasn't taking anything. It was more like she was bathing in the light. I thought about calling her, but something about her behavior made me want to sneak back to my bedroom. Then I saw it. Something was wrong with her ear. Her left ear was about 3 inches higher than her right, without her bending her neck. Her scalp seemed slightly tilted, and there was something about the way she moved her fingers that didn't look natural. They pointed in different directions, as if her hand were slightly broken. I just stood there for a while, watching her from a distance, seeing her shoulders rise and fall as she took deep breaths. The cold air inhaled. As she turned toward me, I saw her only for a moment. Her upper body moving first, and then her legs like a stiff puppet. I managed to sneak around the corner and heard her run back toward the basement again, her feet thumping unevenly against the carpet in the hallway. When she reached the door, she stopped. I leaned against the wall and listened from the other room. I heard her walk a bit around the door. Then there was a cracking sound, a cracking limb, something finding its way back into place. Her steps resumed a natural pattern as she ran back downstairs. I just stood there for a while and tried to stay calm. For all intents and purposes, I might have just seen her in a strange light. It was dark, and I was sleepy, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something unnatural was about her, that I had seen something I shouldn't have. From that day on, I became more suspicious. I stopped walking in the hallway at night and tried to avoid the basement door altogether. I did my best to just banish them from my mind. I focused again on finding a job and a second tenant for the upstairs. Both proved challenging, but I made progress. Cleveland Airport hired me, for example. Not a glamorous job, but it would be steady work. A few students came by to check out the upstairs space. A young couple who needed a place while they finished their master's degrees. They seemed like solid people, and we got along quite well. They knew the place wasn't the most glamorous, but it was a nice short-term solution while they finished the upcoming semester. The only problem was the Parker family, whom I hadn't introduced them to yet. I remember knocking on the basement door and having the young couple stand expectantly behind me. David, the oldest of the brothers, cheerfully called out, "Come on in." As we walked down the stairs, the family of 4 stood in a perfectly 2-row formation. Parents at the back, 2 children in front, all in their best Sunday outfits, with freshly printed smiles on their faces. The whole scene was so absurd, like a misplaced advertisement from the 1950s. "Hello," Lisa giggled. "Aren't they the nicest people, David?" "They certainly are, Lisa. What do you think, kids?" And in unison, without a pause, the children replied, "They're really nice." For the next 20 seconds, an uncomfortable silence grew between us. The Parkers just stood there, smiling at us and waiting for some kind of reaction. I wanted to say something, but couldn't help feeling like I was missing something obvious. Was Lisa's eye color a bit different? Was David's face a bit crooked? Was David missing a finger? Or was he just standing at a strange angle? Maybe they had been strange from the beginning. Maybe I was just seeing it now. As we finally parted ways, I followed the young couple outside. They both turned to me, their faces pale. One of them just stammered, but the other managed to form a few words. "We're not judges," she said, "but these people give me the creeps. You won't see them often, they—" "Yes, you understand, that's my point. Who does that? What kind of family lives willingly in a basement? It's just a temporary measure, I assure you, they—" By then, the other one spoke up. "What about the boxes?" he asked. "What's in them?" "No, I mean, the box that moved, the blue one." The conversation died down, and they said their goodbyes. I had a feeling they wouldn't be back anytime soon. Still, their words echoed in my head. A box that moved? Really? How had I missed that? After countless sleepless nights, I finally decided to get some answers. I had to take a small risk and find out once and for all. So, one day, I slipped a note under the door informing them they needed to clear out the basement for an afternoon while a plumber made some repairs. I looked up a few plumbing companies on Google and contacted a real one, making everything look official. Later that day, Lisa and David came by, hand in hand, and told me they would be away for the day. "Maybe we're going to the zoo," David smiled. "Don't you have work?" I asked. "She comes and goes," he laughed. "We're very happy." "Very happy," Lisa agreed. "So happy." At the agreed time, the family was out of the building. They drove out in David's car, promising to be back shortly. I told them the plumber wouldn't take more than an hour. They seemed a bit suspicious since the plumber hadn't shown up yet, and left that suspicion hanging in the air. Eventually, I just lied. Gave them a fake name and asked if they wanted me to call him. Lisa didn't believe my bluff, luckily, but as they drove out of the driveway, I could see I was sweating. I didn't even know what I was afraid of, but my mind kept returning to that night when I saw her in the fridge light. I had no idea what they were hiding or what they could do if I found out. But a part of me just wanted to get in my car and drive away, and another part told me I was crazy. As soon as they finally left, I didn't hesitate. I rushed down the stairs, turned on the light, and began going through their stuff. It was an invasion of privacy, probably illegal, but if I wanted to sleep peacefully again, I had to have some idea why they were so damn strange. There were many oddities in their space. For example, all their beds were perfectly made, as if no one had slept there. Most of the sofas and surfaces were covered in dust. I could tell the TV hadn't been on for a long time. It wasn't even plugged in. There were no phones or chargers, no laptops or desktop computers, just a bunch of boxes and unused furniture. However, I did find a Polaroid camera, at least 30 years old. I began searching through their boxes. It seemed to be just clothes, all the variations of what I'd already seen. Identical sets of shirts, pants, dresses, and shoes. At least 4 boxes full. One box was only filled with accessories like earrings, necklaces, glasses, hairspray, and fake nails. Another was full of decorations and knickknacks. Porcelain dogs, family photos, dried sunflowers, and roses, both with strange colors and stylish vases. I took my time and carefully put everything back as I had found it. It was strange, but nothing distressing or completely unnatural. Still, I remembered what the young couple had said about a box that moved. I couldn't find anything like that, except for one incident when I turned around to leave. Right next to the stairs beside the spotless bathroom stood a large blue styrofoam cooler. It was the kind of thing that somehow blended into the background, as if it had always been there. Still, I distinctly remembered never owning anything like that. It looked old and torn, as if it had been there for years. And maybe I was imagining it, but it looked like it was moving, pulsating, pressing against the surface and making small plastic squeaks. A sound came from it, like a deep, throaty growl seeping through a thin pipe, a sharp, rhythmic noise. It made the cooler lightly rattle and shake. I froze, hoping it would quiet down. I held my breath and waited for it to calm. Slowly, I went back up the stairs. As I turned the corner and no longer saw the cooler, I heard the styrofoam lid come loose, and the sound became clearer. A loud growl shifting in pitch from high to low, like a singer doing some kind of sick vocal warm-up, trying to find the right pitch. Then something with a painful squeak hit the floor. I stopped abruptly and tried to identify the sound. It was like a mix between a dog and a fox, a sharp, screeching tone. Then it climbed up the legs. I could hear claws and paws scraping against the floor, and something was coming at me fast. Something primal inside me told me to run. I dashed up the stairs and only glanced back briefly as I shut the door behind me. I saw it just for a moment. Something black, with a single eye reflecting back at me, skin tight and out of place on its skull, teeth jutting out in all directions, seemingly random in size. Black saliva dripping from an elongated tongue. A thing, the size of a cheap black dog's suit. As I slammed the door shut, I heard a car pull into the driveway. It had been less than 30 minutes. Maybe they had planned to catch me in the act. I heard them come in and go straight to the basement. Meanwhile, I was in the other room, packing a small bag with a change of clothes and a toothbrush. The moment I locked the basement door, I headed to my car. As soon as I got into the car, I saw them stepping out of the house. They all stood in the driveway just staring at me, and right next to them was a beautiful black Labrador, the dog wagging its tail happily. I didn't say a word, I just drove away. I needed to create some distance between us and figure out what the hell I wanted to do. I wanted to go to the police, but there was no way to explain what I had seen. What could they even do? Evict me because they had a dog? There was even a clause in the lease that allowed them to have a pet. I had nothing to stand on. I decided to spend the night in a motel a little outside of town. I needed time to think and sleep without the threat of something strange living beneath my feet. I couldn't get the image out of my head. That black thing in the dog costume. Like something trying to remember what a dog looks and sounds like in real time. I checked into the motel and got a room on the first floor. I crawled into bed, turned on the TV, and browsed a bit on my phone. For the first time in weeks, I could relax, but every time I thought about that house and that family, I felt my pulse skip a beat. I had no idea what to do or who to call. That's why I ended up on this site in the first place. Many of you seem to have seen strange things. I thought I'd post here eventually, but it took quite a while to muster the courage, especially because of what happened later that night. I remember a knock on the door. I must have fallen asleep. I hadn't turned off the TV or brushed my teeth. I just woke up with a sour feeling in my stomach that something was terribly wrong. I had drawn the curtain so I couldn't see who it was. I thought about hiding under the bed or locking myself in the bathroom. My mind was racing, but I tried to dampen it with rational what-if questions. Maybe it was just the house cleaning or a concerned manager. Then it knocked again, this time with a voice. "Sir?" said Jake Parker. "Mom wants to talk to you." I didn't respond. For a few seconds, I cautiously crept out of bed, trying to be as quiet as possible. "Mom wants to talk to you," he repeated. "It's urgent." There was no way they didn't know I was there. They knew and they wanted something, and whatever it was, I didn't want to find out. I crept to the back of the room as the doorknob began to rattle. I heard Jake again. This time his voice sounded ominously deep, like the dark growl of an adult or older man. "Mom wants to talk to you." I pulled the curtains of a window on the back side of the building. I thought I could climb out the window. But as soon as those curtains were opened, my heart skipped a beat. There stood David, the father himself, just a few inches from the window, standing upright with his neatly pressed shirt, illuminated by the harsh light of the only TV screen, a perpetually polite smile settling on his face. He knocked on the window. "Could you please open?" he asked. "It won't take long." Again, I looked closer, and again, I could see small details that just didn't add up. A slight droop of the lip that wasn't there the day before, one eye deeper than the other, his hairline farther back than usual, as if he had rushed to look like a person. Another knock on the door, another knock on the window. Voices from the front and back, maybe even from the adjacent room. Small voices, loud voices, broken voices. "We just want to clarify a few things. Mom wants to talk." "It's not what you think." I had to find an escape route, but I had to decide where to go, so I shoved the front curtains aside to see how many of them were waiting in front. All 5 stood outside: mother, father, children, and dog. I looked back, as if trying to convince myself I was sane. There were 2 Davids, and neither of them looked right. Down the street in their car, I spotted 2 more children, identical to Ethan and Jacob, both with small quirks, as if they weren't fully formed. A loose jaw, a strange eye. One of them had a wide bald spot. As I stepped out of the motel manager's office, I saw another Lisa, this one with an arched arm and a paralyzed face. I was surrounded. I held my phone up like a weapon. "I'm calling the police," I shouted. "Get the damn things away from me." "That would be inconvenient," David said. "And you'd be dead," added Ethan. "Dead a long time ago," Jacob giggled, his voice off-key. The doorknob rattled again, this time harder. I felt my pulse quicken, my breath shorten. I looked around and saw David at the rear window, trying to break the lock. Only now did I see that one of his fingers was just bone. "How about a trade?" Lisa suggested. "Something for everyone." "What the hell are you talking about?" "Go to your bathroom, take a piece of tissue and chew on it, then throw it out the window." "What?" I couldn't understand what I was hearing. It was like the words were there, but they didn't make sense to me. "We need a new suit," Lisa said. "You will do it. You're not forcing me into the suit. Oh, we'll leave you alone. And you leave us alone. Because if you don't, people who look like you will start doing horrible things. Right, David?" "Oh, they do, Lisa," one David said. "Horrible, horrible things. So we can all go away. You'll never see us again, and we'll leave you alone." I tried to comprehend it. They wanted to make a suit out of me, like they did with that dog and that family. There would be someone who looked like me running around outside. Something abominable. But what choice did I have? I walked into the bathroom and chewed on a piece of tissue. I spat it out and went to the window. The family stepped back. I opened the window and threw the tissue out with a flick of my wrist. Lisa picked it up and met my gaze with an expressionless look. With a firm clench of her fist, she grabbed the top of her head and pulled. Her entire face jerked back, her lower lip reaching up to her eyebrows. Below was only that black sludge covering a deformed skull. She was like a walking oil slick, completely pitch black and as smooth as water. She shoved the tissue into herself before lowering her face again. It took a few seconds for her to realign, but she just couldn't make it look right. She coughed a little. She waited. She nodded. And when she looked back at me, she did so with my own eyes, speaking with my own tongue. "Thank you," I heard myself say. "I think this will work for all of us, right?" I couldn't respond. I couldn't think. I simply closed the curtains and sneaked backward. I heard a car drive by. I heard rustling in the bushes behind me, and from afar I heard my own voice one last time. "We're gone by morning," she said, "but we're never far away." A car drove off, leaving me in silent stillness, my mouth dry from hyperventilating. The next morning, they were gone. The basement was empty, and they even left a thank you note. Attached was a Polaroid photo of a happy family: a mother, a father, 2 children, and a funny uncle, one who looked exactly like me. I've been thinking about sharing this for a while because I knew what they could do, but I don't think they're tech-savvy enough to find this, and I left out many details. I just need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar, and if so, how you managed to get rid of them. Are they still out there, watching me? How many suits do they have? I just wanted to leave this behind and pretend it never happened, but it's getting harder. Every now and then, I see someone who vaguely resembles them. A David with a different haircut. A Lisa who looks a bit younger. School photos with an Ethan or Jacob, but with different hair colors. And a few weeks ago, I got a call from a friend who mentioned he saw me in the local newspaper. Only problem was, I've never been in one. I've thought about moving somewhere far, far away, but first, I just have to get this off my chest. I need someone to believe me, the real me, not the me you might see in the newspapers. There was a time when my home was always filled with noise. If I wasn't being awakened by the constant arguments between my 2 sisters, Emma and Sophie, my father, Mr. Best, would pull me out of bed each morning. He insisted I help him sand and varnish the old fishing boat he was restoring in our small town of Willow Creek, nestled along the shores of Lake Michigan in northern Indiana. Everything changed one Sunday morning when I woke up to an unsettling silence. Typically, my mother, Mrs. Best, would be up early, calling me downstairs for her famous blueberry pancakes. But that day, there was no such call. At first, I thought everyone had gone out, but as I made my way down the creaky wooden stairs, I found my mother standing in the kitchen. "Why didn't you call me?" I asked, confusion lacing my voice. She barely glanced my way, giving me a fleeting look from the corner of her eye before turning back to her cutting board. "Mom, what's wrong with you?" I pressed, frustration bubbling up. She didn't respond, continuing to chop vegetables with mechanical precision. "Did I do something to upset you?" I wondered, sitting there in stunned silence, bewildered by my mother's strange behavior. Lately, I had been getting into trouble with our neighbors. They didn't like it when I rode my bike down Main Street, despite it being safe and a common pastime in Willow Creek. The Johnsons, in particular, seemed to harbor a dislike for kids playing on the streets. Still, my parents never really reprimanded me for it. In the living room, my father sat in his favorite recliner, the television off. He avoided making eye contact with me, which only heightened my unease. "What's going on with Mom?" I asked again. My father and I were very close, like best friends, except for that one time I crossed a line. But 99% of the time he was amazing. So I was even more confused when he turned away without answering. "Why aren't you talking to me? Did I do something to upset you?" The worried expression on his face told me that ignoring me was bothering him, which only made me more scared. I rushed upstairs to my sister Emma's room. Normally, they only talked to me when they were teasing me, but if I had truly annoyed my parents, they would have been the first to tell me. I knocked on Emma's door, but there was no response. I could hear muffled voices inside. When I opened the door, both sisters sat on their beds with the same strange expressions on their faces as our parents. "Not you too? What's going on with everyone today? Did I do something?" I demanded. They sat there, avoiding my gaze. "If this is some kind of prank, stop it, because you're starting to scare me." They remained nervously seated, exchanging uneasy looks. In a fit of frustration, I picked up one of their sneakers and threw it at Emma's head. She flinched when the shoe hit her but didn't say a word. On any other day, she would have punched me. Later that evening, things only got weirder. I came downstairs to find everyone in the kitchen. My mother was still chopping vegetables while my sisters and father sat around the kitchen table. They sat there in silence, wearing the same odd expressions. "Can you all please stop? This isn't funny." All they did was stare at each other, trying to ignore my presence. At that moment, fear gripped me. "Mom, I love you," I said, attempting to pull her into a hug. As she tried to move away, the knife slipped from her hand, cutting her finger. "Mom, your finger. There's blood everywhere." I could see the pain in her face, but she continued to silently chop the vegetables. "Dad, won't you say something? She's bleeding." It felt like I had awakened in a terrifying alternate reality where nothing made sense. The fear I felt was palpable, and what made it worse was that no one seemed to care. For the first time in my life, I felt utterly alone. That night, I lay in my room, questioning why my life had taken such a frightening turn when I heard someone rummaging outside my door. I jumped out of bed, ready to investigate, but a note slid under my door instead. "They're watching us. Your dear sister Emma." The next morning, I went downstairs to the kitchen. My mother, father, and sister Sophie sat at the table, whispering among themselves, becoming silent the moment I entered. "Where is Emma?" I asked. They remained still, but the looks on their faces told me something terrible had happened to her. "Who's watching us?" As I stood there, tears welled up in my eyes. "Please tell me what's happening. I'm scared." I looked at my mother, then my father, but they just sat there, avoiding eye contact. Something had happened to my sister and I had to help her. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Adam Best. I live at 456 Maple Street in Willow Creek. I believe my sister has been kidnapped. I could hear the operator's breath on the other end, but no words followed. "Hello? Can you hear me?" I pleaded. Suddenly, a loud crackle filled the phone before it went silent. I could run away, I thought to myself as I sat on my bed. Emma's note disturbed me. Who's watching us and who are they? I wondered, when something caught my eye. I was shocked I hadn't noticed it before. There was a small camera, barely visible, hidden in the upper corner of my room. My heart raced as I realized every move I made was being watched. I covered the camera with a piece of cloth and sat back down to think. Suddenly, the lights in my room flickered and then went out, plunging me into darkness. My door burst open, and there stood my mother, father, and sister Sophie. "We're sorry for ignoring you. We were trying to protect you, but now you have to run. They're coming for you." "Who's coming for me?" I cried desperately. "The neighborhood watch." I grabbed my bicycle from the garage and pedaled down the street. All the neighbors stood on their porches, watching me as I rode for my life. All I could think about was the fear that I might never see my family again.